This is Purple Radio.
Hello and welcome to Purple Radio's one-on-one interviews with the Durham students nominated to stand as candidates in the upcoming Students' Union election. My name is Gabriel Radis, station manager at Purple Radio, and I'll be interviewing each presidential candidate. Today, second on my list of candidates is James Burton, JCR President for St Chad's College, and we'll conduct this interview in 4 parts. One, the first part being eligibility, and we'll have a look at that in just a sec. Policies, the SU being our third category, and finally Durham as a whole. So firstly, James, how are you today?
I'm doing really well, thanks.
Good.
I'm looking forward to this, having a natter through the issues ahead.
Good. I look forward to getting through it too. So vis-a-vis eligibility, St Chad's College is, I think, the smallest college at Durham, and the SU president is certainly not the smallest role at Durham. How do you think you'll manage or cope if you were to be elected?
So obviously Chad's is small, but being a JCR president, a lot of the roles that I'll be doing will be very similar to that of a DSU president. It's a lot of talking, a lot of representing students. It's a lot of talking and liaising with senior management, something I have to do regularly as JCR president. So I'm not too worried as such. I mean, this has been a right challenge with not being able to meet a lot of students face to face, which when you're dealing with such a large body as all of Durham students is going to be a thing that will become in useful when it comes to be a DSU when becoming DSU president. And beyond that, previously last year I had been faculty rep for social science and health, so that was like all the undergrads in that faculty, and that was quite a challenge to always represent and listen to all the views. But doing that kind of work is probably good preparation for something that's a bit sort of talking about a larger group than just Chads. And
if I'm not mistaken in thinking, you must have been at Durham for a significant amount of time. What's to say that, sort of halfway through your term as SU president, you suddenly realize that you've very much had enough of Durham and that you're far older than the people? Are you not perhaps slightly out of touch from freshers?
Well, this year, I've, unlike other colleges, the Chad's president is non-sabbatical. So I'm a third year, I'm a finalist PPEist. I am dealing with all the same studying issues that every student's facing right now, be it library access, be it, being it, distance learning, all those kind of things. Right now, I'm living in a bubble with a majority freshers and talking to them about their issues. So while I am, very much aware after working with a lot of sabbatical JCR presidents of the dangers that can come with being at a distance from freshers, I think that this year's experience of both being a student leader, but also, actually I hate that phrase student leader, but being someone who's there to represent students, but also being a student myself has probably prepared me quite well to avoid the kind of traps and follies that can come with having that distance. I'm really hoping to not get burnt out of being around Durham. Being my 4th year at least, so nothing more than a lot of students do here.
Would you say that your experience as JCR president at Chad's is your best or most qualifiable experience of something akin to the SU presidency?
I would probably say so, yeah. I'd probably say that as JCR president, I am accountable to students. I am one of the main voices of the students to the public. I've talked to Platinum before, and I've talked and I've had examples of when I've had to be accountable to the student body. And I think that kind of work is the really important work of being an SU president, being that public face of an enterprise, but also working within student groups. So I'm on a wider student experience group to do with employment and other bits and pieces. A lot of work in college as well in Chad. So I sit on the finance committee of that, and all these kind of bits are somewhat, I would think, quite closely related to what the SU president would be getting up to in terms of a lot of meetings all the time, working with a lot of stakeholders, and working to make sure that the student voice is best heard and most their arguments are most effectively made. So I think that's being JCR president has been a really good experience in terms of preparing me for this role.
And in July 2020, in a statement to the Palatinate, you said you voiced your concerns regarding the lack of clarity for the large proportion of students that live out at St Chad's. As JCR president for the past sort of 8 months since that point, what have you done in order to ensure that you've reached out to those and given the clarity that those students that live out at Chad's really needed?
This year has been really tough with working with Livers Out, but I've been working with my student exec, a number of which are Livers Out, and we've been really pushing the college hard at making sure that Livers Out can come in as much as possible. So as soon as we could get them into the bar, we were getting students into the bar. As soon as we could get them into the libraries, we were able to get Livers Out into the libraries. Right now, we've been able to invite Livers Out into our libraries and really try to attract them in as much as possible. It's been incredibly tough, and I've tried to talk to them as on my communications. But mainly what I think the most important thing we've tried to do is really push to get them into college as much as possible so they can have, as close as that as normal. I think at that time it was a really tough time to know exactly what it was going to look like, what was going to be Michaelmas term. And it certainly wasn't perfect. And I certainly can, say that it wasn't the perfect term for Livers Out, but I felt like, and the rest of the exec that was incredibly useful, really pushed to get Livers Out in and communicated to. We also ran a Livers Out. We've been also running Livers Out surveys as well, listening to them, trying to see what their issues are as well.
You are in a unique position here this year of running against a current standing Durham SU president. Why you over someone that has already had a year?
So I think that while Sharon's done a lot of good work in Durham, there's some issues that have been really left untouched. Some issues of how so what I think hasn't been tackled yet is that there's a number of students have questions about where is their money being spent in the SU? How exactly does the SU work for them? How do these staff members work for them? And I feel that some of these questions haven't been answered yet by SU staff. And I really want to enter here as not just a simple outsider, but someone who's going to be critical of exactly what the SU do, not blasé critical, but thinking exactly how does this work most effectively, thinking through individual parts of the SU and thinking how does this work for students and how can we communicate this to students that it does work for them, or if it doesn't work for them, how can we fix it? And I think that sort of self-critiquing is something that I really am passionate about. I don't think that I'm not sure that Sean would be exactly the same on.
So I do want to touch on a couple of things that you mentioned about being an outsider or potentially being seen to be an outsider and some of the money things as well. But I do want to give an overview question that I have thus far asked everyone, which is what gives you rather the most qualification or the most experience, the best prior experience to being an SU candidate, an SU president rather, over the other candidates?
So I would say that my experience working with in a college environment, but working with other JCR presidents, working with a wide variety of student leaders in the colleges and also in the DSU as well, has given me that preparation in order to hopefully work as an SU president for all aspects of Durham. Someone who's had the day-to-day experience of dealing with the kind of issues that the university throws at colleges who are trying to do it they can. And I think that that's the kind of experience I want to bring to the SU role and say, look, we can do so much more potentially to help some of these colleges and common room presidents, but also work together to achieve a better outcome for both parties.
I'd like to now touch on policies and main policies, and obviously your manifesto is yet to come out. But I think something that is quite telling is you mentioned the Palatinate earlier, and the Palatinate and what to do regarding the publication or non-publication of the Palatinate is a hot topic in the SU world. What would you do?
I think in my opinion, obviously I haven't looked exactly at everything, but my gut instinct is saying that the cutting of the funding to Platinum was one of the great mistakes of the SU. Not only did it bring it more negative and embarrassing national press, but it also brought up a really large amount of questions. When you look at the amount of money that the SU gets, I understand that it's dropped in about £100,000 worth of funding, but that is taking it down by around 10% of its funds. It seems to me that I think it came across the student body, there wasn't a real critical understanding of what else could be cut and what other discussions had been had leading up to this cutting the Platinum. And I think without it, it's unsurprising that students would really put off by this decision to cut funding to Platinum, because they don't know, they don't understand the inside of the cash books. They don't know what else was on the chopping block potentially, and they probably feel, and I assume rightfully so, that there was some less valuable things that could have been cut, particularly, in my opinion, when the SU should be there at providing opportunities for students. It should be there at providing actual opportunities that could go into real employment and work. And I think the Platinum is one of the utmost best examples of this, in terms of something you can go to with no experience, with none of, parental insight into the industry, and you can go there and you can really make something of yourself and go on and make a great career. And I think that cutting the Platinum was a poor option because of that, because it was, to me, it really sparked something that's fantastically good at improving students' opportunities to get into certain roles.
I take your point. I think that's all well and good, but where would you get the money, or where would you reallocate the funds from? Because obviously there needs to be some cuts, some cutting of costs. It's a large portion of money, and would you reinstate it? I mean, I don't think you've said it explicitly, but would you seek to reinstate it?
I would want to seek to reinstate it. But one of my main policies, which definitely ties into this, is talking about the wider SU finances and opening up it. It's the first thing I really want to talk about when talking to students, because I think a lot of students see their money, which it in essence is, going to the SU, and they're not seeing the returns on it. They're not feeling like they've had interactions with the SU. So if we can start having that conversation and say, look, this is where the money's going, then hopefully we can start answering these questions. Look, well, here's where it's not going to the Platinum. So I would look to reinstate the funding, but it would definitely work best if it wasn't just a one-off call of, oh, look, it's Platinum or not Platinum. It's looking at the whole picture of going, look, there's too much funding here, or there's enough here. It might not be an easy conversation to have, but I think it's an important one.
Aside, obviously, from what we've just discussed, what would your other major policies be?
So what I'm looking to do is take my experience from working in the common rooms and take that to the SU. I know that a few members of the SU staff that I've talked to are interested in sort of not totally redeveloping the relationship between the SU and the common rooms, but work to make a better understanding between them so they can both work together. Because a lot of the common rooms often have a lot of difficulty working with parts of the university bureaucracy, getting the right representation to certain levels, and it has a negative impact on the end point, which is the student experience. So really working and on asking those important questions of how can we best support the common rooms? The SU strategy is coming up for renewal at the end of this year. I think the plan is from what I've talked to when I've talked to members of the SU to be going across the summer potentially of there being these discussions. So it's a really important time now to get this election result right and to get Durham moving in the right direction in terms of bringing these common room voices in. But one more thing that I really want to do is, once we can talk about finances and get people interested and get them to buy into the SU based on them feeling like they're getting value for money, and once they've got buy-in because they feel like the common rooms are being listened to, we then have the chance, with as many people on board as possible, to get more radical with the aims of the SU, really take it to the university in terms of accommodation costs, really work with a mass group of students in order to hopefully get accommodation cost changes. Because I think without that mass student buy-in, you're not going to get the progress you need. You're not going to get in order to get the changes that the SU have talked about for a very long time, but sometimes have not succeeded in getting progress in the slightest.
And just a final point on your policies, because what I'm kind of ascertaining from what you're saying is a sort of more conciliatory, more open, more transparent, more sort of welcoming and more scrutinized environment. And forgive me for saying this, it may well be important, but it's certainly not sexy, for want of another word. How would you deal with the other candidates perhaps having more radical, sexier, more interesting policies?
I would beg to differ. I think when I talk to most students about the SU, they say, I don't know what it does for me. I don't know what on earth it does. And if you tell people it gets a certain figure of funding, whatever that be, if you talk about the general overview turnover or what exactly it gets in the university, they go, wow, what on earth is this? And I think that's incredibly salient, and incredibly valuable. If you look at what the SU president does and what SU officers do, it talks a lot about being the ensuring the SU is the best it can be and the best and working the best it can do for students and in order and to ensure its longevity. And in my opinion, to ensure the longevity of the SU, we need to have these frank discussions about money, because it will hopefully bring people interest into it. It will explain to people what's going on. It will make, and by having a discussion, it means people's voices can be heard in shaping exactly what the SU does. So I think there will be buy-in.
You have talked about sort of general public apathy towards the SU, and it's a good juncture to move on to the SU as a whole. If we were to see a similar instance to last year, for example, the Ron candidate coming first and you were coming second and the SU offered you the presidency, what would you do?
From what I understand, there are elections rearranged for Easter. That's definitely happening. So if that was the case, then I would say, look, I don't think this is right. We run to the Easter elections. They wouldn't be able to turn back on that. That would be absolute disgrace if they did. If we got to the Easter and there was a similar campaign for Ron and they won again, then I think it wouldn't be right for me to take up the role. I think that we can't carry on again and again making these same errors. I mean, my hope is to listen to some of what the Ron campaign was saying, not take from it in its totality, but pick out some key themes that I think can be answered not just by a Ron campaign, but someone who actually is in the institution, who's actually an SU president, who can go in there and say, look, we need to sort these issues out, because there is, well, from the last election, it told us there's a majority of voices that have these real issues with the SU. So I'm hoping to avoid that. But if it does come up, then I think that it would be wrong for me to sort of take up the mantle, particularly if I run on something, run on the manifesto that I am doing.
And what was your reaction to hearing about the SU's new and varied approach to having Ron candidates being, in effect, individual different Ron candidates?
It was a difficult one. I think it was difficult to make the right call. I think to me, there are certain, the problem came that there was probably a lack of consultation. There was a perfect opportunity to mention it or to discuss it in detail at an assembly, DSU assembly, the previous week, but it didn't come up then. And there was and it was really unclear exactly who made that decision, who was being consulted, and where it went. And I think these are kind of things that really are rubbing people up the wrong way again and again with the SU. So I think that was the problem. If they said, look, we talked to a bunch of people and they thought that this is a good idea, I think people would have less worries. My other worry about it is that there was, I believe the SU are not comfortable talking about hypotheticals. So for example, what happens if one of the candidates gets a friend to run the Ron campaign and then gets it disqualified by sending out a mass email using one of their email addresses, for example? That's a realistic thing. when it seems to come as a first come first serve for who runs its wrong campaign, how can it be accountable to the students? Because if the first person turns up just wants to make a mockery of the show and stop students from ever voting wrong in any given election, then who's to stop them doing that? And how do you exactly judge that? So I think it really does bring up a lot of issues, but primarily I just think that they should have talked to more students about it. They should have really dug into exactly what students want from Ron and avoided some of these criticisms.
I'd like to also look at, you've mentioned the structure of the SU in a sort of holistic sense, but I'd like to look at the SU officers and the structure of the SU officers. Do you think that's working? Is it not working?
That's a very good question. That's a good question. I think that in general, it does work as it currently is. I think it's right to separate things, definitely in terms of the academic side of things. We've seen the academic officers do some really important work this year. I think that right now, changing that probably isn't the first priority among students. I don't hear students say, I think that it should be totally changed. I think it does reflect generally what people expect from the SU in terms of they want academics, they want their welfare sorted out, and they want the opportunities, which is the main branch of it, done. So I don't think that that's totally in need of change. Though I definitely think that going forward, it's always important to have open discussions about what people want their SU to do, and also making people aware exactly what officer does what, or at least the general ideas of what an officer does.
And it would be remiss of me not to touch on COVID-19 and the impact that has had. How much do you think the SU has done to date, and do you think it could have done more?
I think this is a really tough question, because as someone who's been JCR president and been in meetings before, when you've really wanted something and then it's been clear that the university are just not going to buy into it. I think on the mitigations policy, the proof is yet to come out in the pudding, because we're very soon, seemingly, the mitigations policy is going to be bashed out in full. From what I understand, it's tracking in the right direction, and I think that's been some really important work that the SU has done. Could have it done more? I think potentially. I think what they could have done in terms of SU, the space of the SU, getting more people in the SU during COVID. I mean, the college has worked incredibly hard to maximise, and I worked incredibly hard in Chad's. I know other colleges did as well, to maximise the number of livers out and just general students that could get into their body, in the SU. And I think that that's something that I would have pushed for more, because I think as a result, when I talk to some of the freshers that I live with and the freshers around Chad's, they don't have any connection to the SU because simply they haven't been in the SU. They haven't been part of that, and I think that has sparked a lot of a lot of people just to not think the SU is doing much for them.
And do you support a no detriment policy as of this year?
I support I support a real strong series of mitigating policies. I think that some form of no detriment policy could work. I really think it could do, but it's got to be pitched right. I'm in my third year, for example, and I don't know, with a no detriment policy, there's so many different variants of it that could mean that I could get all kinds of different grades, pre-COVID, post-COVID, bits and pieces here and there. So there's a potential that it could work. Obviously, something massively needs to go into place to really support students. I think one massive blanket no detriment policy wouldn't be exactly the right route forward. I think something more nuanced needs to happen this year, but I definitely don't think it's the wrong thing to go into questioning about what a no detriment policy could do.
And by that token, if there was to be a sweeping, as we expect there to be a sweeping number of sort of very nuanced mitigation policies, you would be inheriting the SU presidency with effectively an entire Durham University cohort, probably about 80% of which who have had exams affected or mitigated for or no detriment policies for some, if not all, of their entire university career. How would you help fix what would seems to be a almost generational problem with exam marks and results at university level?
Uh, I'm not sure what you mean by that, as in it being a problem.
As in, I mean, at the moment, if we take it, people next year in their third year will have had their first and second years mitigated for, and so you now have people that are going into their finalists who haven't really had full exams pre-COVID, and how would you look to, as in from a president's standpoint? Obviously, it's important for you to report the view of the people to a degree. I mean, if that's what you're running on, but how do you reconcile with what will inevitably be a very difficult issue next year, which will be that we will have had 2 years, or well, a third year would have had 2 years of mitigating circumstances?
Well, I think that, I mean, it gives the university an opportunity, or everyone at the university an opportunity to really look at what works best in terms of exams. How best to run the exams that we do right now, and there's a real chance that as we go back, that we can change the parts of the the parts of the exam season and some matters that people really do dislike, and have a bit more of an open debate on that potentially as we go back to some sort of new post COVID, post vaccinations experience. I think carrying on the really important work in terms of the stress less campaigns that are run will be incredibly useful, and supporting the SU can do some really good work in terms of that, and in terms of helping people prepare for exams. I think that's this kind of like the SU can have a really important role as being a centralized source of information, of advice, of welfare support at the time of exams. It's really hard to know exactly what it's going to be like come exam season, summative season next year. But I think the most important thing is talk to students about how they're feeling about things. Have the university be open about what they're going to be doing next year, and get a debate going about what's the best way to build back in terms of academics.
Sure.
And also be there to support them. Sorry.
We are running out somewhat of time, but I would like to get through a couple more things. One more thing on the SU, and then a final point and a final topic. The SU as a building, Durham House, is ostensibly unfit for purpose in an airborne pandemic, and that has been shown by a number of rooms having to be closed. I can speak from experience. Purple Radio is no longer in use as a result, as a building. How difficult do you think, or how much of a part of your presidency do you think that will form, and do you envisage that being an incredibly difficult element of your presidency?
I think it's a vitally important part to get people back into Durham House. I think it's a really good way of getting people to connect to the DSU. I think it could be a challenge. I mean, a lot of the buildings. I used to do a show with Purple Radio. I know how bad the airflow is in there at the best of times, anyway. So I think that could be a real challenge, depending what the rules are. I mean, my hope would be that by the September-October time coming back, that a lot of these policies won't be in place. A lot of restrictions won't be in place. But if they are, I think it's vital for us to work hard as a new fresher cohort comes in to get them into SU spaces. I also think that the SU bar and cafe need to be that they really need to be looked at, and think how can we get people in here in particular as well. I know the cafe's been done up recently. It barely got open before it had to shut for COVID. But you're carrying on discussions about that, and making sure they've got lots of people coming in and out of the SU, which I think would be really valuable.
So we'll now look at Durham very quickly, and Durham as a whole. The SU president sits on the Senate. You'd be sitting, if you were to win the election, obviously, you'd be sitting on the Senate with a new Vice Chancellor. How comfortable do you feel about the prospect of that?
I think it'd be a very exciting opportunity to work with a new Vice Chancellor. They're going to. It's unclear where they're going to come from, but they're going to be a bit potentially someone who hasn't maybe got full form views on each and every part of Durham, and the chance to shape what they see of Durham, how they feel about it, is going to be incredibly valuable. They're going to come in, and as an SU, with experienced staff and with a great knowledge of Durham and exactly what we want, or what the SU wants, and what students want, what common rooms want, then we can hopefully work to make things not turn over a new leaf, but work in a bold direction. It's going to be obviously a time of great change, hopefully coming out of COVID, and also having a new Vice Chancellor. I think it's a really exciting opportunity to get a lot done, and hopefully a lot done quickly.
And a couple of final points. I mean, I know you're a politics student, or a student of politics in some way. Burkean representation. Do you believe in Burkean representation, or are you more of the descriptive nature?
Oh God, it's been a while since I've been doing
to that end, and I'm happy to kind of explicate it in a sort of more layman terms. How do you, if you were ascribing to descriptive representation, how do you feel about putting forward a point and arguing a point that you don't believe in on behalf of students?
I think that is important. I think, I have in the past had discussions with students and felt that I have a slightly different opinion to them in terms of what they may think. But I think it's important if the majority are saying that they want a certain thing, or even a minority that have a clear point, that they need to be listened to, and then their opinions need to be put forward. I think what often happens, and what I've really tried to check for myself, is that the more you get involved in things, the more you see the inside workings of a college or of the university or the SU, you buy into it almost too much, and you sometimes become blind to the fact that students are walking in here in these doors, not knowing exactly how everything works, how the finances work, and how all the little bits work. But they want a good experience, and they don't, and that's what their real opinion is. And we are working to achieve the good ends of these people. So often some of the worst things that come from being an SU or being a student representative is when you sort of end up forgetting that students want these things regardless of how often feasible they are, but they still need to be really portrayed, because in the end they might actually be feasible, and you need to be really blunt and say it. So that's something I'm trying to really avoid.
And two pithy answers really for the last couple of questions. How have you found Durham?
I found Durham a incredibly enjoyable place to be. I've been incredibly lucky with my time here. A lot of my experience has come from being in a fantastic community of Chads, where the small years mean you can really get to know a lot of people, and have this sort of great sort of community experience. I've had this with certain societies as well, and I think as a result it's made it really enjoyable. It's made it tough this year though, I'll give you that, because because some of these great parts that come from Durham, from the socialising, this ability to find your people, or at least a wide range of people that you can meet, it has dried up to some extent. But I've had a great time here, and I really am passionate about carrying that on and improving it for students going forward.
Very pithy. I guess to limit you to one sentence, in one sentence, what would an SU presidency look like with you at the helm?
It would look passionate. It would look critical at the SU, and it would look really at getting the student voice, common rooms, SU, people who support the SU, getting them all involved. That's how it would look.
And we've got a couple of minutes over the 30 minutes allotted time, but I do hope that the listeners will have appreciated the fact that there was quite a lot to cover. But James Burton, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
For more of Purple Radio's interviews with candidates in the run-up to the SU election, click on the playlist now.